Okay, welcome back to my channel. I am Four Corners of the Page. I'm really glad you are here. And today, what I want to do is introduce a new series that I want to have on the channel. I'm still very new, very babyish, but what I really want to do, um, maybe every 3 or 4 weeks currently is the trajectory, is interview some self-pub or indie author. I have no idea what the series is going to be called yet. I'm thinking maybe self-pub convo, something like that, because I really want to put the emphasis on the conversation, not the interview. I don't want it just to be me banging questions back and forth. So I'm very delighted and really thrilled. I was singing his praises before we started. I have Dr. Philip Chase here, author of the Edan Trilogy. Hi, Philip.
Hey, it's great to be here. I am deeply honored to be the first guest on whatever you end up calling this series. But also just bless you for being willing to talk to self-published authors and help to shine a light on the fact that there are some really fantastic and worthy stories being told by people who are choosing to go the self-published route. So I'm excited to talk to you about all this.
You know, we were talking about it before we hit record, but part of the reason I wanted to start this series is because I had a really false notion of what self-pub equaled until I would say about last year. I read a couple of self-published books that were remain nameless, I should say.
Mhm.
Um, and basically adopted my whole opinion off of those 1 or 2 books. And it was only last year when I started to read Michael Fletcher was one, Matt
Yeah.
Denham, who has now completely exploded, and a couple of
Yeah.
others that I really realized that there's something here that I'm not quite getting, and that my interpretation of what this corner, what this scene is totally wrong. And so this is also my journey to try and rectify this to some extent. So I'm really excited for it, to be honest.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, I'm happy to be a small part of it.
Yeah. Well, talk to me about yourself, Philip. We have the Edan trilogy is your main trilogy that has already been completely
Yep.
published, and congratulations on the broken binding as well. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm showing off my copy over here. Yeah.
And you've got a new one coming out in June. Is that right? While Darkness Gathers, When Darkness Gathers?
While Darkness Gathers,
Yeah.
correct. That is a sequel to the Edan trilogy that takes place 16 years after the trilogy ends. And it is something that I would recommend reading only after reading the trilogy because it is a sequel. But yeah, and it's a much shorter book as well. It's a little bit of an experiment for me. I'm trying to tell a more streamlined story in this sequel,
Okay.
and it's been fun. I have actually finished my editing, and now I've sent it off to my developmental editor, who a lot of people know is AP Canavan from A Critical Dragon. And hopefully it won't come back too scorched from Professor Fireballs, but we'll see how that goes. Um, and yeah, and the plan is to put it out in June or so. Yeah. So yeah.
Looking forward to that. Talk to me about what that self-publication journey was like, if that's not too broad a question. And because often
Yeah.
we see, it seems from my perspective that what happens is an author decides to self-publish, they hit, enter on the keyboard and suddenly it's out there. But I'm sure that's not the reality at all.
Not at all. No, this was a bit convoluted, I guess. I mean, I could go all the way back to the 12-year-old me who read Lord of the Rings and decided, hey, I'm going to be a writer, and went about doing this on the very much the scenic route, going into academia because I was told I should have a day job, which is probably good advice, and following a path that at times may have been consciously and at times unconsciously modeled after Tolkien, doing I'm a medievalist and I love Old English and Old Norse and all that. And that definitely informs my writing. But I had other experiences as well. I lived in Nepal for a time, primarily in Kathmandu, but I've been exploring all over that country and all over India as well. And it's a journey that really did change me in some really, I think, important ways. Having that experience, you're somebody who likes to travel as well, so I think you can relate to this. But getting to know people from a different culture with a different worldview has been a tremendously important experience for me in that it challenged me in some ways and changed me and allowed me the privilege of experiencing to the degree that I could learn the language and get to know the people and try to understand their outlooks and their religious traditions and so on and so on. Um, it gave me, it really enriched me in so many ways. And I ended up being able to connect with people in a way that I found transformative for myself and able to see myself in some ways in people that I would have previously not understood were very much like me in some fundamental ways. So I think that that journey really did also inform my writing. And ultimately, I did start writing after I finished my PhD and settled down with my day job after a couple of years. So in 2004, I started to write, finished a draft and by of what is now the first two books, but with one book then in 2007. The first two books in the Edan Trilogy. The first draft was done by 2007, and then I'm writing in the summers primarily as well, by the way, because I'm an educator and I get too busy during the semesters to write all the time. That would be great, but
I sympathize.
I
Yeah.
do have to pay the bills.
Yeah.
So yeah, I then thought I would go the traditional route and go into traditional publishing, and of course that means you have to find an agent, and that was a process that took me years. And ultimately, by 2012, I got an agent. And in the meantime, I've been tweaking the book and playing around with my world and that kind of thing. But finally got an agent in 2012 who said, "Yeah, I'm going to take you on, but this isn't one book; it's two books. I want you to do, this, and he gave me pretty broad, feedback, and then said, "All right, you get back to me when you're done." And I took probably a year or two before I got back to him, and yeah, he really helped me make the story better, I must say. And it was really a privilege to work with this agent. Ultimately, though. My timing was terrible, and I was writing epic fantasy at a time when epic fantasy is not what traditional publishers were looking for.
Yeah.
And my agent made a final pitch right when the pandemic was at its height. And it took about a year for the publishers to even acknowledge that they had received his pitch.
That's
In other words,
horrible.
after a year, it's like, okay, we got your submission. Thank you. We'll get back to you. And it's like,
So you're
really?
probably sitting there waiting for some kind of response as an acceptance or rejection, and what you got was
I'm waiting every
red.
day
Yeah.
after he made the
Received
pitch, and I'm
red.
like, when are we going to hear something? A year or so later, that was when I realized, okay, um, this industry is broken.
Yeah.
There's just something fundamentally awry here, and it's not. I'm not blaming any individual because I know there are good people who work in publishing who
Hmm.
want to get out good stories, but they've been pinched by circumstances, by the internet, by changes, societal changes, and just a lot going on that is not in the favor of the traditional publishing industry. It's been broken up
Yes.
by a lot of factors. So I realized that at that moment, it was a pretty. I had been toying with the idea of self-publishing up to that point. And that was a very clear line for me where I was like, yeah, I think I need to have a conversation with my agent. I had the conversation with my agent, and he actually right away says, yes, you should self-publish. Yeah. He believed in the story and he felt there would be an audience for it. But he also recognized that traditional publishing was just not in a place where it was likely that I would get any takers. And so he said, you should go for it. So he never got a dime from working with me
Yeah.
because, of course, I self-published. And before I self-published, I should point out too that I worked with AP Canavan, my developmental editor. I mentioned him a little earlier. He also helped me to make the stories better. And but in by 2023, I was ready, and I had three complete books
Yeah.
in this trilogy. Actually, I had even written While Darkness Gathers, a draft of it. So during the years of waiting for him to make a pitch, I had simply written the third book, and then I wrote the sequel. So I just was ready to go, and I was able to, because I'm self-publishing, I was able to say, okay, I'm going to release all three books in one year. No traditional publisher would probably allow a new author to do something like that. And
It must be
because
quite, sorry
I'm,
to interrupt, it must be quite emancipatory almost to have this thing and
oh,
decide to put it out yourself, because then you have complete creative control, or at least what I imagine is complete creative control in that way.
yep.
Yeah.
Emancipatory is a great way. Actually, the overwhelming feeling once I made the decision to self-publish was one of freedom.
Hmm.
And I have not regretted it once. since I made the decision to go ahead and self-publish. And yeah, it was one of my better decisions, honestly. So yeah, it was very freeing, and I had the experience of working with some great artists and with a great cover designer, map maker,
Mhm.
in Jack Shepard, and I already mentioned my developmental editor. I never felt I needed a copy editor because being an English professor for almost 30 years does have its benefits,
Yeah.
such as being a pretty good copy editor. So I know where a comma goes and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a really fantastic time working with some wonderful people to help bring this to life. And yeah, the process has been fantastic. I couldn't be happier. And of course, having a YouTube channel dedicated to exploring the merits of fantasy as literature, it was a platform that allowed me to simply say, "Hey, everybody, I'm publishing my trilogy. If you want to try it, this is it," you know. And I certainly had that advantage. Now, of course, I had to work pretty hard to create this channel and get enough momentum where I have any kind of audience at all. So I don't feel guilty at all about using this platform to tell
Oh,
people
absolutely.
about my story. Yeah.
But I think as
I mean, there are
well,
people.
sorry, so no, I
Yeah,
was
go
going to say,
ahead,
but I
Dave.
think as well, the reason that you have the channel is the same reason that you were able to publish these books, which have been have very much enjoyed and are seen as very successful. It's the fact that you have this background
Yeah.
knowledge and this kind of work ethic and this idea that you need to polish something to make it presentable. They're
Yes.
kind of born out of the same
Yeah.
place.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah. For me, it's all one thing.
yeah.
It's all springing from the same passion, which is a passion for storytelling and for the power of the fantasy genre in particular to offer a sense of meaning to readers, to give readers the psychic distance that they may need to wrestle with some of their experiences.
Mhm.
And I hope that the story that I've offered in the Edan Trilogy has been rewarding for some readers, that they've been able to connect with the things that I'm wrestling with, some of the themes, and identify maybe with some of the characters. And I have been told by some readers that that is the case. So it's been very fulfilling in that regard, I must say. Yeah.
I've read just the first book. I've read The Way of Edan,
Mhm.
Prophet of Edan. Here's the thing. I read book one on my phone, which I've got right here.
Oh gosh.
My least favorite way of reading a book, but all that was available to me was the Kindle. So I've got book two in Scotland that I will get to when I get back in June. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I enjoyed it very much. And I always enjoy hearing you talk about the themes that are kind of inherent within the story. I've heard you talk about the love of storytelling, which is very prominent on the page.
Uh-huh.
I also heard you talk
Yeah.
about the theme of exile, which is, very prominent on the page without getting into spoilers. But one theme that was resonant with me that kind of made me question the philosophy. I'm wondering what you think about this. I think one of the more prominent themes that I don't hear you talk about as much is the theme of power and autonomy.
Uh-huh.
That you have these characters, without again going into spoilers, that characters are completely wrestling with how much agency they have in this world.
Right.
There's a line, and I don't want to spoil things, and I will paraphrase it, but there's a certain moment in The Way of Edan where the main character, about two-thirds through, finds themselves in this situation, and the line is something along the lines of he kind of looked back and wasn't quite sure where he could have taken himself off this path. And that
Right.
idea of to what extent are we kind of in control of where we are, and at what point are we just kind of flowing along um, with everything that's kind of come before, which is certainly resonant of another author you and I both enjoy.
Oh yes,
Yes.
indeed. Yeah, and in fact, I think the more you read into the trilogy, I'll be straightforward and say that I wrote the first two books before reading Malazan, and the third book I wrote after reading Malazan. And there may be, I would never call it Malazan-esque or anything like that, but the effect of reading Malazan was a freeing of the imagination for me as a
Yes.
reader and as a writer. And I felt able to explore certain themes with a kind of abandon. I also felt able to introduce a brand new character in the third book. Something that Steven Erikson does all the
Yes.
time is
Yep.
introduce a new character in the book five of the series
Yeah.
or
Book
whatever.
nine.
But even book nine, yes. And important characters too. So yeah, same. And to explore the aftermath of a major conflict rather than stop the story when the big battle is won and the hero's given everything and everybody goes back home and hurrah, everything is great. that's not how the real world works. You
Hmm.
don't come back from a conflict the same person.
Hmm.
So, that's something I wanted to look at a little more in depth in the Edan trilogy. So, um, but
But
you're right. Autonomy is a very big theme in there, and it is a fact, I think, that knowing oneself is a lifelong journey.
yes.
But the more you go down that path of self-knowledge, the more autonomy you can experience.
Hmm.
And that is something I hope is reflected in the trilogy, not only for the protagonist, the main protagonist, that is to say, but for other characters. Sequara, for example, is one. But there are even some characters who would appear to be villains, if you will, in the first book, who get explored in different ways later on, and yeah.
But there's something quite interesting there, which is that I wasn't actually referring to Malazan. And I think um,
Oh, okay,
the
okay.
comparison is so interesting because in some ways this author is not kind of connected to you whatsoever, but in the other ways, I do think that you're tackling a similar theme here with differing
Hmm.
conclusions, which is our Scott Baker.
Oh my goodness. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Because obviously, having read Baker, and you're much further along than I am, his whole thing is that everything that precedes us is what defines us, right? Everything that comes
The
before,
darkness that comes before.
exactly,
Yes.
is what
Yeah.
prescribes the path we're walking on. And I think
Right.
it almost feels like kind of a yin and yang thing because I don't believe that you're nearly as bleak as Baker, or I wouldn't use that word bleak at all. But I think there's a similar
Right.
interrogation here of that everything that comes before us defines who we are as human beings.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think I'm closer to Erickson in the answers that I explore
yeah,
than I am to Baker.
yes,
And I think you will see that more and more, though many people say that the Edan trilogy gets bleaker with each book.
yeah,
But I don't think it's, for me anyway, it's not grimdark, and nor is Malazan.
yes,
Whereas Second Apocalypse is as grimdark as you get, in my opinion. It is absolutely grimdark in the sense that if grimdark, now for me, um, grimdark is fundamentally fantasy's answer to existentialism.
yes,
That's what grimdark is.
yeah,
And I respect it for that. I absolutely think there's something really empowering in the notion that, okay, maybe this world, this universe we're in doesn't have any intrinsic meaning.
yeah,
However, through your struggle and through your connections that you make with the people and the beings around you, you can craft meaning from this life.
yeah,
And that's existentialism. And that's what most grimdark really is the sense that, nah, there's no meaning to any of this. But if we put on our boots in the morning, strap on our sword, go out in the world and try our best, maybe we can create some meaning.
I'll need to find
Um,
but
what's that?
I'll need to find my sword first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think we all do
Would
to some degree.
would it be fair to say then that obviously you and Baker have very different tones? But if we're talking about that
Yeah.
theme of autonomy and kind of free will, Baker
Yeah.
obviously it seems as though we are continuously walking down this path that has been set for us, that has been preordained for us. But for yourself,
Yeah.
we must recognize the influences that drive us, but doing
Mhm.
so is a means of empowerment, or maybe not empowerment, maybe not be the best word, but self-realization.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And for me, Baker is just brilliant, by the way. His writing is utterly magnificent, and he is bold in his exploration of ideas in a way that very few people are. So I have a ton of respect for what he's achieved. I couldn't read his books every day of my life, though, because I would just find it overwhelmingly depressing,
Yeah.
continuously confronting the idea that I really don't have any autonomy, that I don't have any free will, that everything is pretty much, I'm ignorant of the forces that are driving me.
Hmm.
But they're there, and I don't really have any say in the matter. Maybe he's right. Emotionally, I don't want to think that he's right, but intellectually, there are times when I think maybe he's right. And again, he doesn't shove this down your throat. He is exploring this more through the story than telling you this is how it is. So,
Yeah.
I think he's doing a brilliant job of it, of presenting it as an exploration. But ultimately, I do think he's coming from a place where I don't think he personally does believe we have free will. I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with him. He would be a really wonderful person to talk to. But my suspicion is he doesn't think we have any, and he may be right. But I have to live my life as if I do anyway. I think that I wouldn't get very far if I were constantly conscious of the fact that I don't have free will.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get very far. I would be paralyzed with, okay, well, then what's the point? So I choose to ignore as best I can the idea that I don't have free will, and I choose to embrace the idea that I can make decisions that change those around me and myself, and that matters. And that provides me with a sense of meaning. And that is something I see in, let's say, Malazan or Realm of the Elderlings or Wars of Light and Shadow. These are series that, for me, are as bleak as they can be, as sorrowful as they can be, as devastating as they can be. Ultimately, they are affirmative of our ability to connect with other people and to make meaning through those connections and to make a difference. So that's the difference between those series, which are brilliant, and Baker's Second Apocalypse, which is also brilliant,
Yes.
but I think has a slightly different answer that it's exploring than these other series.
So if the
Uh,
Edan Trilogy ends with a bleak, harrowing destruction of the world you've created and all characters, I'll know you've been lying to me.
that's true. That's true. I would have to say that I have been very duplicitous if that
Yeah.
if that happens. Yeah.
Let's talk
Yeah.
about some of the influences that have kind of shaped you then, and have also shaped
Sure.
the crafting of this world you've created and of the book. So there's kind of two rabbit holes I'd quite like to go down, and one is that kind of cultural exchange and that intercultural experience, which seems to have shaped you with Nepal and other countries, it sounds as though. And the other one is your love of medieval literature. Actually, no, can I go with the second one first? I always ask someone this who's done a PhD, can you tell me what you did your PhD in, more specifically, what was your thesis about?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So my thesis happens to
Oh,
be
go
right
on.
behind me here. This is my dissertation.
Go on.
So I don't know if you can read that or not, but
William Morrison, Germanic Language and Legend.
yep. And so yeah, this is essentially, as a medievalist, I'm very interested in translation.
Mhm.
And William Morris, you probably have heard of him, but he was an English chap in the 19th century who was later associated with the second generation of Pre-Raphaelites. He was not a painter. He did try to paint some. He's most famous, perhaps today, for the company that he founded that made wallpaper and medieval style furniture and things of that nature, decorative stuff. But in his time, he was actually considered to be a successor to Tennyson for poet laureate.
Interesting.
So he was quite famous in his own lifetime, in the Victorian times,
Mhm.
as a poet, as a writer. He translated Icelandic sagas. And this is what I was really focusing on in my dissertation. So this is a series of Icelandic sagas that he collaborated on translating with an Icelandic fellow named Eiríkur Magnusson. They produced a pretty nice group of translations, including the Heimskringla, which is a really important text written by Snorri Sturluson, who also wrote the prose Edda. And they basically, Iceland inspired William Morris in so many ways. He was also later in his life a very committed socialist,
Oh, interesting.
and yeah, he a lot of his beliefs, his political beliefs, stemmed from his interactions with Iceland, with sagas, with older Germanic culture. And he believed in a kind of communalism, an
Hmm.
egalitarianism and communalism that led him ultimately to being a passionate socialist. And so I'm looking at the language of his translation, where he would often Germanicize the translation in ways that a lot of modern readers would find very stilted and awkward, and using a lot of archaic words,
Hmm.
leaning on some older etymologies and things like that. So he would say, instead of there was a man called, whatever, a man called Siegfried or whatever, he would write a man hight Siegfried or something like that. So he would use the old form, like as in German, ich heiße Philipp, right? So a cognate with much older word that is no longer used in English, but he wanted to use as much as possible archaic and Germanic language because for him that was connected with his idea of this communal society that was very much imagined. It was very much a very idealistic picture of the earlier, the Dark Ages and earlier Germanic culture. But I was looking at his translations as a kind of political assertion, and he develops of this language that he uses in his fantasies because he also wrote, in many ways, the first secondary world fantasies. Tolkien was very inspired by William Morris. He
Hmm.
wrote in the 1890s a series of fantasies that are set in secondary worlds that he created. And the language he uses in those
I'm
fantasies
just,
is very much a
I'm just
product
writing
of
this down
his.
for later. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, yeah, yeah.
Enjoyed following up on this. There we go. Sorry about that. Sorry to
Yep.
interrupt you.
Not at all. No, I mean he's a very important figure for
Yes.
fantasy and not much read these days. But he wrote a bunch of fantasies. Like his first two were kind of historical fantasies, the House of the Wolfings and the Roots of the Mountains. And then he wrote some that are just completely in absolutely just made up worlds. And those, the Well at the World's End is one of them. The Water of the Wondrous Isles, the Sundering Flood. There's a whole series of them.
Mhm.
But so yeah, and Tolkien in his early letters was writing to his then fiance and absolutely enamored with William Morris's writing, and you can see that Tolkien picked up a lot from William Morris. So that's what my dissertation was about, essentially. That's the short version. Yeah,
I love asking people that question because it gets to the heart of
yeah,
what someone is about. Because obviously, when you're doing a PhD, it's one of the things, maybe
yeah,
outside of family, jobs, things like that, that you are most passionate about. I think
yeah,
translation is such an interesting thing as well. One
yeah,
of the lessons I did in my secondary classroom, because I often work in schools where the kids are bilingual, is giving them a text in their original language and asking them to translate it and then having them kind of share those translations with each other and identifying the
yeah,
nuance that they aren't even aware that they're doing. Because a lot of people just see
yeah.
translation as a one-to-one process, which it never is.
No,
Yeah. Yeah, but
it's fascinating.
if you could give me your, I was going to say elevator pitch, that's not quite right. So I have read Saga of the Volsungs years ago.
Okay.
I've read
Yeah.
Beowulf last year while I was getting my washing done in a laundromat in Ireland. I had a copy of Beowulf on me and I read it and I really enjoyed it very much. And I do not know where to go from there with medieval literature. So while I have you, if you could give me
Ah,
so William Morris seems to be a great place to follow up on, but where else, if you had someone in
sure.
front of you, like you do right now, saying, where should I go with medieval literature? What would you recommend?
Well, it depends on where you want to go. I mean, if you are interested in more of the Saga of the Volsung type things, the other mythological saga from Iceland that I think people should read is the saga of Hrolf Kraki. Um, Now, Hrolf Kraki is actually mentioned in Beowulf as Hrothulf, the nephew of Hrothgar, who is, of course, the Danish king that Beowulf helps out by killing Grendel. And there is an allusion in Beowulf to Hrothulf usurping the Danish throne from his cousins, Hrothgar's sons. So there, Hrothulf is a bit of a villainous character in a way, but in the saga of Hrolf Kraki, he was historically a Danish king. He's very much a kind of a King Arthur kind of figure,
Mhm.
and he attracts all kinds of renowned warriors, including one named Bjolfvar Bjarki, who is in many ways a bit of a Beowulf analog, actually, because he's very bear-like. In fact, he is a berserker in the sense a true berserker. He turns into a bear during combat. Bit of Tolkien nod there,
Oh, yeah,
obviously.
absolutely.
Yeah, just a little Tolkien nod there, obviously, in The Hobbit. With Bern, who is basically modeled off this Bjolfar or Bjarki character. So But yeah, so the saga of Hrolf Kraki, I think would be a fun one for you.
Okay, absolutely.
And if you're interested in the more domestic Icelandic sagas, which are fantastic, as literature, I would say some of the best things produced in medieval Europe were produced in Iceland, as far as great storytelling. And there are a number of really good ones. The saga of Burnt Njal or Njal's saga, Njal. There's the saga of Grettir the Strong is another good one. And there's so many good ones really. But yeah, and you have yeah, Nils is probably my favorite. Egil's Saga as well. Egil. That's another good one. Egil's Saga. And then if you want to read deeper into like the mythology and such, there's that fellow I just mentioned a little while ago, Snorri Sturluson, who wrote the prose Edda. And that pretty much 95% of what we know about Germanic mythology comes from the Eddas, really. The prose Edda being basically Snorri's attempt to explain in the 1200s this dying art form because they've been Christianized since the year 1000 or so. And he wanted to keep the skaldic tradition going. So he was explaining all these stories that are behind the illusions that the skaldic poets use. And that's what it's basically a poet's manual is what the prose Edda is. And then there's the poetic Edda, which are poems of the sort that Snorri is quoting from and trying to keep alive. And so you could read that. And most of what we know about Germanic mythology comes from those two Eddas, the prose and the poetic Eddas. So those would be fun.
You know,
Yeah.
it's so interesting because so many people, including myself, I'm guilty of this too, kind of see Tolkien as the beginning. Do you know what I mean? That is where
Uh-huh.
fantasy
Yeah.
started. 1937, I think The Hobbit came out, something like that. That is where
Yeah.
fantasy, quote unquote, begun. And you hear that Tolkien had, was a medievalist and had all these kind of literary influences, but you kind of, but mentally, you kind of go, this is the beginning. Tolkien is the grandfather where it started. And actually, behind the scenes, there's this wealth of material, which I know nothing
Yeah.
about. William Morris seems to be incredibly, as you've just mentioned, seems to be an incredibly
Yeah.
powerful, influential character that, his books aren't up there in the fantasy bookshelves, are they? Um,
No, yeah. I mean, you won't, it's actually kind of difficult to get his fantasies. There are some reprints, but you have to search. And there's others like Lord Dunsany, and there's quite a few who preceded Tolkien. And it's kind of interesting. It's not a well, it's certainly not on YouTube anyway. A well-studied portion of the fantasy genre is the pre-Tolkien authors who, yeah, there's quite a few really. But E.R. Edison is another one, and there's stuff going on on the more sword and sorcery side of things.
yeah.
The mostly in these kind of pulp magazines and stuff. But certainly Robert E. Howard, was doing his Conan stories and stuff, and plenty of others. So yeah, there's plenty of before Tolkien, but I don't think there's any doubting that Tolkien has had more than any one person a vast influence on the genre.
But
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to what we were saying that no matter who we are indebted to that trail that is behind us, isn't it? We,
Yep.
we can't escape it.
Yep.
Although we don't go as bleak as Baker does, we are continuously kind of thinking about all this layers of material that has formed who we are as people. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
how do you?
And Baker, by the way, if you keep reading the Second Apocalypse, the second sub-series, the
Yeah.
Aspect Emperor, is very much a subversion of the Lord of the Rings. There's just you'll see so many nods, and I think they're affectionate in on some level too. But Baker is very clearly subverting the Lord of the Rings in his particularly in Aspect Emperor.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned your teaching. Do you teach a fantasy course at all? Do you do that?
I started a fantasy course at my college
Yeah.
and it ran beautifully for years and I had a great time with it. And the YouTube channel, by the way, was my attempt to save that course because a bunch of decisions, state level, but also administrative decisions at my college, essentially made it impossible for students to take my course. There was nowhere they could put it. And so they basically, we teach about a third as many literature courses as we used to teach. And my course was a casualty of these administrative decisions that obviously I'm not thrilled about.
No.
But it's a shame that a thriving course that the students loved was killed by these decisions. But we're in an era where the humanities are increasingly under threat,
Yes.
unfortunately.
It
And,
feels. Sorry, Nico.
yeah. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, like, from the past 45 minutes of this conversation we've been having, there's this really strange, almost paradox going on where the traditional
Mhm.
publication scene is kind of getting mired, and I think the word you used was broken. We have these
Yeah.
humanities courses that are getting truncated and shriveled, and you know what? I can see that in the secondary English level as well, that the appreciation for English as a subject is something that keeps getting, um, although we have so many class periods allotted to it, something that is increasingly scrutinized for what it is supposed to be. And at the same time,
Yeah.
we have channels like yours, and we have
Hmm.
self-publication voices that are coming out. And
Yep.
there seems to be this weird disconnect going on where, in some hand, the 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 amount of reading that is going on in public spaces has never been louder. And at the same time, on another level, it seems to be dwindling away.
Yeah.
Paradoxical.
I think there's some misreading on the part of many of the people who are making decisions.
Yeah.
And they're making some decisions that I strongly disagree with. And but because they make these decisions doesn't mean that the kinds of stories that we talk about and the kinds of conversations, just having conversations about stories, they're not going to go away.
Yeah.
We need stories. We've always needed stories, and we need to talk about the stories. And there's meaning and enrichment in that. So it's not going to go away. It's going to find a new place to thrive. So if it's not in our education system, we go to YouTube and
Yeah.
start, weird channels
One
all
thing
about the best of fantasy.
Yeah, one thing
So
I've always appreciated about your channel in particular is that you talk about the fact that books move us and they affect us and they have resonance with us. And it isn't just like an academic discussion or something that it's book reviews shouldn't just be, I liked this, I didn't like this, here's my score. You know,
right.
books are something that impact us and move us and often can impact us depending on when and where we're reading the book. That reading is equally as an autobiographical process as writing is the book is itself.
Yep.
When you're talking about books that move us and shape us and kind of mold us into who we are, again, going back to those influences that change us as human beings, I think that's one thing that your channel is really good and really articulate at doing.
I'm glad you think so because that was really the goal.
Yeah,
In addition to me trying to save that course by having a supplement as a YouTube channel as a supplement to it. Really, I wanted a space to talk about fantasy as a genre that has produced many, many works of literature that are worth critical exploration and that
yes,
are enriching for us and
yeah.
help us understand who we are in some vital ways. So, yeah, that's why I'm here. And it's been a great journey. And I've been able to very fortunate to be able to reach thousands of people through this platform and it's a much bigger voice in a way than my classroom where I'm limited to the number of students who are there, and I love my students and I love the conversations we have about literature in there, and that will always be special to me. But this is interesting
Yes.
that I could go on YouTube and have ironically, because I don't get paid very much to be here. I get the little bit of ad revenue,
Yeah.
um, pays for the books, that's nice. But I can reach a lot more people through YouTube than I can by teaching in a traditional college. So yeah,
One thing that I'm finding with secondary that upsets me sometimes. So I'll be careful how I word this. But certainly I would say the Cambridge curriculum is kind of guilty of this something. They do have a literature course, but when I'm teaching English in the classroom, often it's to do with spelling and grammar, formal versus
uh-huh.
informal writing styles.
Right.
Um, what else? How to write an article versus an essay versus a letter. And I'm sitting there teaching these, or hopefully standing up and teaching these things, depending on how lazy I'm feeling on the day. Um,
Yeah.
and it's only sometimes that we get to books. And so I've been teaching a Monster Calls by Patrick Ness to my year seven cohort, and I teach Macbeth to my year eight. And those are the classes. I don't know if this is just where I get more enthusiastic, Philip, but
Sure. Yeah.
those are the classes where the kids sit up and pay attention. Because as brilliant as I am, it's hard to teach grammar. Um,
Yeah.
and it's not something that is at the forefront of the kids' minds. But see, when you teach Macbeth, even to kids who can sometimes be quite disengaged. I had a kid last year. We finished Macbeth, a year eight kid, about 12, 13 years old, and she was crying when we finished the final scene. And I kind of went,
Wow.
this girl is joking with me. There's no way that, this kid who was not the most engaged in the classroom is crying that we have finished Macbeth. And I kind of pulled her, and she legitimately was weeping that we'd finished this the first kind of significant piece of literature that she had consumed in her life. And I think we
And
underplay
you know what?
emotional resonance.
She is never going to forget that
No,
experience. Yeah.
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 What
That's
books
really
would
great.
you what books would you say are the most resonant for you? The one, if I say books that move you, that resonate with you, which
Oh
are the ones
gosh.
that immediately come to mind? Like I know you have 20, but if you had to pick three that immediately flash into your brain, what would they be?
Oh, you're giving me only three now?
Flash
Okay.
the ones that are coming to you right now, what would they be?
Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's okay, it's a series, so there I cheated. There's 10 books. The Lord of the Rings and Realm of the Elderlings. I'll put that in there. Although if I could keep going, I could keep going, but I'll obey the rules to that degree. Those three, I guess, yeah.
What about in the publication space?
Wow. I read actually for SPFBO, so I'm a judge for SPFBO. And there's one that I would definitely want to shout out. It's called Hills of Heather and Bone by K.E. Andrews.
That is a great title.
And by the way, since you're, I don't know if this is good or a bad thing, but I believe that K.E. Andrews is American, but she wrote this book very much with a Celtic and specifically Scottish influence.
You like to
So
see it.
yeah, I mean it's very Scottish, and even in the dialogue. I think you and so as a person of Scottish origin, you might find it interesting. But it's a beautiful story, and for me, it was a story of marriage. It wouldn't be correct to call it romantasy because romantasy, at least in my mind, is about a sort of young couple coming to through obstacles and whatever to ultimately getting together, and that's kind of the I would think the basic framework for romantasy.
Mm.
Um, it's a couple that gets together. Okay, great. This is about a married couple. They're already together, and it's about marriage. It's about yes, there's a fantasy story. They're running for their lives because of the specific type of magic that she, in particular, has is sort of looked upon as evil in that world. So for various reasons, but it is beneath that narrative of them running for their lives is this exploration of a relationship of a married couple
Mm.
and the beauty of it, but also the frustrations and the difficulties of being with another person and understanding and sacrificing for each other. And it's just a beautifully done story in that sense.
Yeah.
So I love that one. I absolutely loved Murder at Spindle Manor, which was the book that won SPFBO 9. And it was actually the book that my first year as a judge for SPFBO, it was the book that I forwarded as a finalist. So my first year as a judge, the book that I forwarded won the whole contest. So I was pretty happy that. But I was also lucky, honestly, to have that book in my batch, to begin with, because I read it and right away I knew, okay, this is my finalist. And I still had some other books to read and I read them, but it was clearly my finalist. It was that good. I just knew it was just like a feeling of wow, this is really good. So yeah, no, that's definitely a standout. In terms of, I should mention some that I've enjoyed a lot outside of SPFBO because I do read just some indie books just because I try to be supportive of other authors. Von Roycroft's Sundered Nation trilogy is one that I've really loved, and the third book is going to be out very soon. But the first book is The Severing Sun, and it's a historical fantasy. It's Goths meet Romans, but in a fantasy world, and It's just incredibly well done, really engaging, very flawed protagonist, and with a really sweeping epic world. So it's that's kind of my wheelhouse, really. I love epic fantasy, especially with a sort of historical bend to it, I guess. But yeah.
You are exploding my TBR, and I'm very
Oops.
grateful for it. One thing,
Yeah.
we can go back to the Scottish comment. One thing that was kind of interesting me as you were speaking, you kind of,
Yeah.
what was you said exactly? You said this, might be up your alley because it's set or kind of got thematic implications of Scotland. One thing I've
Yeah.
noticed since I've moved away from Scotland is how much I don't want to say miss it, but how much more
Yeah.
onto that identity now that I've been gone. I don't know if that's something
Yeah.
you kind of experienced as well. Have you been on your travels abroad? That sense of
Oh
home.
my goodness. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting if you look at diasporic communities.
Yeah.
The longing for home and the importance of that part of your identity. And it's something that you more consciously cling to and try to preserve.
There's a great word
It's
for
really,
it, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. It's really something as and you're not exactly an exile. I mean, you can go back, but it is an opportunity to reflect on where you're from. That it was my experience. Part of my experience living in Nepal was reflecting on where I'd come from and understanding it in a way that I could never have if I had simply stayed there. So I'm on the outside now. I'm learning a different perspective, and I'm able to use that perspective to look back and see where I've come from. And it changes the way I see it. I
Yes.
think I have a more whole view of it as a result.
Yes.
So it is really transformative in that respect. Yeah.
One thing I had when I lived in Japan that I had to kind of get used to and also kind of begin to have myself was this idea of subtext. There's so much layered subtext in Japanese culture. So I sometimes tell people
Yes.
that
Yeah.
when I'm in Scotland or when I'm in the States, my wife's American, and someone tells you to open a window, the implication is it's cold. And when you tell someone in Japan to open a window, currently the implications might be, are they telling me my walls are too thin in my house? Things like that. Um, is there something I've done? Have I served too hot tea, something like that? And you have to kind of cycle through all the possible implications that are going on. It can be a bit, I kind of had to shift my thinking there almost. I had to kind of begin to recognize there was nuance in my words that I hadn't quite opened on before.
Yes.
Yeah.
I experienced that exactly because Nepal is also a very high context culture, like Japan.
Yes.
And the United States is very low context. So we Americans, we tend to just say what we mean, and we don't really read a lot of nuance into what other people say. So when I was new in Nepal and was a guest at someone's home
Yeah.
for dinner, you know where this is going.
Mhm.
They would serve me food, and I'd be like, "Wow, this looks great," and I would eat I love the food, by the way. And I'd eat the food. And I grew up in a very New England puritanical household where you have to finish all the food on your plate, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I know where this is
You
going.
see where this is
Yeah.
going,
Yeah.
right? So I would finish all the food on my plate dutifully, and then of course my host was like, "Oh, would you like some more?" And I'd say, "Oh, no, thank you. I'm full now." And then boom, there's a bunch of rice on my plate. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Wait, I said no." It took me a long time, longer than it should have, to learn that if I really mean no, I need to actually like cover the plate with my hands and insist
Yeah.
very strongly that I could not possibly eat anymore, or even just move the plate away, or something like a little more emphatic. But just saying no is a signal to my host that I actually want more. And the fact that I cleaned my plate
Yes.
is a signal to them that I want more. So here I was an idiot, and I would, there's all this food on my plate that I actually didn't want, but I was like, okay, Puritan background. I eat the whole thing and I'm like stuffed full. Oh, would you like some more? And they must be thinking, he can eat a lot, you know? And I'm thinking, I can't eat anymore. And I'm just like, well, no, I'm actually really full. And then boom, and there's more food on my plate. What do I do?
And you kind of think before you've gone into these situations, we'll kind of just
Yeah,
work it together. The human spirit, we understand each other. Cultural differences don't exist really because we can just,
right.
if we really mean it, and our intentions are great, we will be fine. And there is an extent of that kind of muddling in together, but there does seem to need to be some kind of recognition that there will be obstacles. And those aren't bad; those are enjoyable, but they are there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I had that
And
in.
by the way, the reverse happens. I have many dear friends from Nepal who also happen to live here in the States, and one of them was a new in the States and was a guest at somebody's house for Thanksgiving, and was asked by their American host, "Would you like some more food?" And he was like, "Oh, no, thanks." And of course, he expected them to offer again because it would be rude for him in his culture to simply say, "Yes, give me some more. I'd like some more." That would be rude behavior
Yes.
in where he's from. So he said, "No, thank you." And they were like, "Okay." And they put the food away. And he's like, actually still hungry, you know? So yeah, works both ways.
Even on a minor level, like when my wife is in the UK with me, she's like, if one more person asks me if I want a tea or a coffee, I'm going to go insane. Because it's just something we do in the UK. Do you know what I mean? We offer them a beverage as they walk through the door, but that's not something she's grown up with. Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
even in cultures that are extremely proximal to each other, we still have these nuances. And even, you know what, between families, between friends, it kind of does go down to that
yeah.
level, doesn't it? We're constantly
Yep, it does.
navigating ways to um, the right ways to encounter one another and encountering differences within each other that are there and are part of the reward at the same time, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I was wittering, so I'm glad you agree.
No,
Um,
I agree.
and you
Yeah.
know, going back to missing home, the Broken Binding cover, that's based on Vermont or is reminiscent of Vermont, is that right?
Yes, yeah. I actually even told Renee Egner, who, by the way, just I am in love with his art,
Mm.
and I had requested him specifically for this edition. And indeed, I actually mentioned in my description of the mark of Kinsford in particular that it's based on my home state of Vermont, and I think he did a brilliant job
It's gorgeous.
of capturing that vibe. You know, it's the
You've
fact that
advertised it well on your channel because I bought mine through one of your videos promoting it. It looks incredible.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the Patrick Leo did a fabulous job as the art director. Renee Egner and Peng Lu did the black and white illustrations, and Jack Shepard did the color map.
Yep.
So there's just so many people who made this book. But as an author, I'm just so thrilled that my vision has been able to take this physical form, this beautiful book. It's the thrill of my life, really. And it's been really fantastic working with these people too. That's been part of the journey as well. And I have a theme song that I commissioned
Oh,
from.
yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be out in a few days, and I'm so thrilled to be able to share that. And I'll be featuring this special edition art along with that theme song when I put out that video. And working with Nikhil Koparkar on that
Mhm.
theme song has been so wonderful. What a wonderful human being and so talented. We have a lot of talented people in our community.
Yeah.
This is a guy who's written music for Wheel of Time and His Dark Materials and all kinds of real well-known. He was just at an award ceremony with Hans Zimmer and a bunch of famous people and and like yeah, that guy wrote my theme song for the Edan Trilogy.
You know, there's
So
something, and let me end with this. There's something really lovely about the Edan trilogy. I mean, there's lots of lovely things about the Edan trilogy. And I wish we'd had more time to actually explore the book itself. But one thing that I really love about your book, just as an object, is how it kind of has tied these different parts of your life together. If that makes sense. Because of course you wrote it well before you made a YouTube channel. But at the same time, I've
yep,
noticed just hearing you talk about the book, all these different members of this community that we're in have kind of come together to contribute to it in some small way. Um,
yep.
and all these kind of influences that you have in your life have come together to produce that lovely addition behind you, or to what would be the best words to kind of bring your vision forward just that little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it, and that's how I feel. And I'm incredibly grateful, really. So we're just gonna have to get together again and talk more about the books.
It's been lovely to chat to you, and thank you so much for being my first guest. I think when I messaged you, I had about 60 or 70 subscribers, and I was dead chuffed. And I'm a slightly higher now, but still a smaller channel. And I really do appreciate your time, Philip.
Oh, well, I have a feeling your channel's gonna grow, actually.
Hmm.
So let's see what
Yeah.
happens if you
I don't
keep
know.
at it. As the Welsh say, it's steady tapping that breaks the stone. So, you may end up with a much bigger channel someday if you keep at it, I
Me,
suspect.
me and my 3 pixels. But yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, before we go, my favorite, my biggest fan is my son, my 4-year-old. Every day he wakes up and he goes, Dada, how many subscribers? And I'm like,
Oh.
how do you know what that word is? And I look it up. I go, okay, 207 today, my boy. And he goes, 207? And I'm like, I'm not sure if he knows what a subscriber is, but he's clearly heard me and my wife talk about it, and it's something that brings him joy. But I think he's just using it as an excuse to get some celebratory ice cream, which, fair play to him. It's not a bad thing.
Clever kid.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
very, very grateful to have started in this community. It's been a lovely time. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on board, Philip.
It's been a pleasure and an honor, and I do hope we will have the opportunity to chat again. And also thank you to your viewers.
Yeah, I would love an opportunity to talk again. One more thing before we go. If there is anyone in the comments who is a self-published author or has a book themselves in the works, there is an email connected to my channel. Please reach out. I would love to read your work, even if it's down the line. We can have a conversation. That is something I would absolutely love to do. So please don't hesitate to reach out on your end and comment below. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Philip's channel, but let me know if you've read the Edan Trilogy and what your thoughts are on it. And one thing I'll say before I go, final thing, Philip, is that I was not expecting the prose to be so lovely. It's clearly a very well polished work, and I think people need to talk about that a little bit more as well. Um,
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I did work on it for a while.
yeah. So that's all. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Peace.